Hi everyone. Listen, I'm an amateur cook, and in this video, I wanted to find out if artificial intelligence can teach me how to cook better. So I reached out to ChatGPT to help me make its version of French onion soup, which is supposed to be different from all the others. I also asked for an interesting serving suggestion. Did it turn out well? Let's find out. The next morning, I woke up and decided it was time to cook. ChatGPT suggested that instead of using a traditional dish for baking the soup, I should serve it in a homemade bread bowl. And you know, I've seen something like this before in my home country, where a soup called jurek is often served this way. I was hopeful about this recipe. What could go wrong, right? Everything seemed to be going smoothly. I mixed all the ingredients for the bread in a bowl, kneaded the dough. Everything according to the recipe. I left the dough to rise for an hour and a half, then kneaded it again and divided it into 2 equal portions, which I placed on a baking tray lined with parchment paper. I let them rise again for another 30 minutes. I baked them and they looked great, though the bread had split a bit at the bottom. I just hoped it would hold up when filled with soup. Once the bread cooled, I cut off the top and hollowed it out. I was given a tip to brush the inside with egg and pop it back in the oven to make the bread more resistant to soaking through. This seemed interesting, but this was the moment when things started to go wrong. I was supposed to bake the bowls with the egg for 10 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius, but when I took them out, the egg still looked raw. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Who am I to question ChatGPT? Anyway, the bread bowls were ready. Meanwhile, I prepped everything I needed for the soup. I sliced almost 3 kilograms of onions into half moons. I had no idea cooking could make me cry this much. As I read through the recipe, what do I see? Caramelize the onions for a few hours? But well, the recipe said to do it, so I did. I grabbed the biggest pan I had and got started. It felt like it was taking forever on low heat, so I turned up the flame. What could go wrong? Well, I found out soon enough. It's hard to believe what was left in the pan started as over 3 kilos of onions. I added flour, garlic, and white wine. I had practically never cooked with wine before, so I felt like a real chef. The only thing missing was some flames. But something held me back from trying that. The alcohol evaporated, and the onions became as thick as the air when my dad lets one rip, so I figured it was ready. I dumped everything into a pot, poured in the broth, and added the seasonings, bay leaves, and dried thyme. The recipe didn't call for much of that, and now it's supposed to simmer for a few more hours. Who has time for that? After 2 hours, I tasted the soup and it was a complete disaster. After all that cooking, I had imagined that when I tasted it, it would be like a scene from a fairy tale. Meadows, bunnies, happiness, but all I could taste was burnt onions, and I immediately knew they had scorched. Still, I decided to push through and finish, since I'd already started. In traditional French onion soup, you place toasted croutons on top, cover them with cheese, and then bake it. But ChatGPT's bread bowl idea didn't suggest using croutons. Just sprinkle the soup with cheese and pop it in the oven for a few minutes under the grill. It didn't seem like a bad idea at the time, but maybe it was meant to be that way. So I sprinkled the cheese and it started sinking. But hey, a recipe's a recipe, so I put it in the oven and what came out? A mess. The cheese melted into the soup instead of browning nicely, turning into a big gooey blob that stuck to the spoon. I decided to give it another shot with the second bowl. This time, my brain suggested it might be a brilliant idea to place the bread pieces I had hollowed out on top of the soup and sprinkle cheese over them. What was the result? The cheese barely had time to brown before the top of the bread bowl burned, making it inedible. The soup itself turned out oddly thick. In conclusion, the flavor of the soup wouldn't have been that bad if I hadn't burnt the onions. I can actually imagine it tasting quite good. The serving method seemed really interesting, and if not for the burnt onions, I would have happily eaten 2 bowls. But the idea of just adding cheese without croutons and ending up with that gooey mess, no thank you. Let me know in the comments what I can improve next time I make onion soup, and tell me if you liked the video. I hope to see you next time. Bye.